Hi, thank you for your presentation. I had two related questions about your cost structure and distribution plan. Talking to Adam earlier, he said that it's free for clinics to donate and that represents a significant savings. And I just was wondering how then you fund your operations besides external grants as you grow. And related to that, as you grow to other states, are you distributing cross-state boundaries or trying to keep the distribution within the state that donates?
Yeah, so absolutely. The donors, and what we found out, started donating because of the community benefit that they could provide. They liked the fact that not only were they helping the people in their facility with healthcare, the nurses being able to help their residents, but also be able to help the community at large by actually donating their medicine instead. And the first couple people definitely took a gamble on us in order to have that benefit, since it was deeply ingrained in what they wanted to do. However, as we expanded, we also found that some people cared more about the business model than the service aspect. And we've developed and found that the Sirum model actually works very well because medicine destruction is a very regulated process. Medicine is considered toxic waste, and so it costs $1 to $3 a pound to destroy it, and it's a pretty laborious process. Some of the records are handwritten and can be over 60 pages long. Not only do they have to write out a 60-page record, but oftentimes they have to ship it across country because a lot of states have banned destruction in their own state. So what we found is that the business case for donation rather than destruction was not only were you doing the right thing for your community, but you were also saving $1 to $3 a pound on destruction and saving your nurses time from writing these paper records and letting them spend more time with their patients. With that business case, we said, all right, we can get donors, but how do we sustain our operations? And the nice thing about medicine is that it's a very clear value. You can look it up in a book. So what we said is, hey, to the clinics that we worked with and we partnered with, look, we'll get you this amount of free medication or this amount of medication, but we want to split the savings with you. So we asked for a membership fee that could be anywhere from 25 to 50% of the savings that we're providing to the actual clinics. So we are charging the clinics a fee. And the idea there is that we want to use grant money and foundation money to go into a new state, to go into a new geography. But once that grant money goes away, we don't want the program to evaporate. It's really important for us to have a sustainable program. So what we do is we use that grant money to go into the new geography. We get a donor and clinic base set up there donating until we get membership fees that cover our ongoing costs, so that even when the grant money dries up, that program will continue to operate. And we have to leverage technology to a huge extent in order to do that. The overhead of Sirum has to be minimal. So most of our actual time and effort is going into recruiting these new facilities and spending time changing people's mindset about recycling versus destruction. But once the program actually is operating, it's almost just like a Match.com. People are putting in their requests, people putting in their needs, and the website does the rest. So that is in large part what we're trying to do for sustainability. And I'll let Kiah.
That was perfect.
Oh, well, and then to answer your other question then about interstate trade. So a lot of state laws don't explicitly or implicitly say anything for or against donation. There's just such ample opportunity within states right now that we're playing it safe and just doing donation there. But ideally, we would want to match a surplus supply in one side of the country with a need in the other. So that's definitely something we're keeping our eye on.
Can I just ask it standing?
Well, it's,
go back all the way back.
it's not sure, but it's for the live streaming.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'll go back. That was a great presentation. Wonderful account of the challenges of social entrepreneurship. I did want to ask you, though, have you encountered, as a political scientist, I'm sitting here thinking, have you encountered any kind of opposition from the interests that might think that they're being adversely affected or could be adversely affected. For example, the people that were disposing of the medicines before and making that kind of money. And I was also wondering about the drug companies and whether you've had sort of any response from them, any effort to stop what you're doing.
Great question. And, there is built-in safety stocks at every part of the medicine supply chain. Because as you can imagine, if someone walked into an emergency room and they had an asthma attack or something like that, and there wasn't the right inhaler on stock, to treat that, that's and that's really terrible for patients' health. It's really terrible for the reputation of these healthcare institutions, and it's potentially, things like malpractice begin to be drummed up. So there's definitely safety stock at every level, and that's what we really try to leverage. In terms of like opposition, there are 50 million people who aren't getting the drugs that they need, and I think that everyone within the healthcare spectrum recognizes that the system is not perfect. And so I think that most folks feel like there is a seat at the table for new solutions, because obviously the ones that we've had in the past have not been comprehensive and people have been falling through the cracks. So I don't think that, in terms of the healthcare industries, there's a ton of opposition there. To speak to some of the waste, the folks in the waste side, we've actually had really good conversations with folks whose job are to take out the waste and for medicine incineration. And it's really interesting to see, there was one guy that we talked to who was like, I want to see medicine go to where it needs to be. I think that as we become a more global society, even folks who are maybe potentially they're willing to see a little bit of revenue, decrease, or potentially partnering with organizations like us to provide more ecologically friendly solutions. Because I think that the business community is starting to recognize in a lot of ways how important environmental sustainability is, not just to the environment, but also how it can benefit their bottom line ultimately in the long term.
Anybody else? Toss myself around for once. The other day you were telling us, I think that as you become more successful and have more and more donations, there are sometimes some issues with people and even companies wanting to donate excess medication, which is excess because it never took off or because there isn't a market for it, or and so you said it's Match.com, but sometimes some people get a lot of dates and some people get not very many dates. So I'm just wondering, how have you tried to address that issue of making sure that it's not just what is excess, but what is actually needed? And what kind of obstacles have you faced in that sort of bad dating metaphor? I don't know. Or my bad use of your good dating metaphor.
I think one of the true powers of redistribution over just simply donation of medicine is that it's actually twofold. First, we have over 200 donors all donating. So when someone is in short supply, another donor kind of takes over. And so when you look at it in aggregate, it becomes a much more stable supply than when you look at any piece separately. I think the second point is that redistribution is also powerful because it's actually what people were buying, paying out of pocket for that medicine is then getting donated. So as a drug takes off, there is more people at the health facilities, more people at the hospitals are buying it, and then they have more surplus, and then they donate more. So rather than simply charitable giving or a manufacturer trying to get rid of something that never took off, we are able to basically redistribute a subset of what was actually purchased at the time. But that being said, there will never be a perfect match. So it's up to us to try to make the kind of redistribution as efficient as possible.
So earlier in the presentation, you mentioned a lot of the sort of political and legal barriers that not you guys, but that the clinics were facing in terms of how they were regulated in disposing their medicine and how they were regulated in donating their medicine. And I was curious as to whether or not you ever received any kind of public help from legislators or politicians or anyone really who is in a position to be able to change these laws with regards to, releasing or relaxing some of these requirements that are hamstringing organizations in the first place. So, how has your relationships been with the local governments or with the state governments that you work with?
Great question. I would say first, earlier in my career, I was very naive in how I looked at things like the difference between public sphere, private sector, and nonprofit or social sector, and said, oh, I don't want to work in the private sector because it's all about money. Don't want to work in government because it's really slow and bureaucratic. Okay, I'll go work in the social sector because I hope it'll be the best parts of both and leave out the worst cases of both, which is a little naive. But I definitely think that, we have really strong examples. For example, there was a state senator in California. His name is former state senator Joe Simitian, who had written the original California legislation that allowed drug donation. That was this Good Samaritan protection. And he heard about our work just in the very early stages and really lended a hand and said, how can I help? How can I help you guys grow? And for example, at that point, there was only a small subset of health facilities that could legally donate their unused medications. And so that's a prime example of, okay, this is kind of, hindering potential growth in the future. And so he was also the chair of the Environmental Quality Committee in the state Senate. So he obviously also had a really vested interest in reducing waste and the environmental health of the state. So he actually did put together some legislation that basically expanded upon the original California legislation for drug donation. And so this is really a prime example of how legislatures, regulators can really be helpful in advocating for solutions like ours and like a lot of folks who are in kind of the social sector doing something new. So I definitely think that there is a strong role that government, local, state, even municipalities can take in helping promote and encourage these types of programs, because the bill that he basically worked on, I think, more than doubled the donor base in California of who was able to donate. So that's a great example of government saying, oh, okay, you guys have figured something out. How can we make it easier for you guys to run?
This question is more about the actual handling of the drugs. There are so many regulations about keeping track of these things and that they don't get lost, they don't get picked up by people who are not supposed to have them. How do you manage that in terms of organizing and personnel? How do you keep track of everything?
Great question. So first I want to clarify one point, that we don't actually work with any controlled substances. So none of the meds that are most likely to be abused. And so that's just one important thing. So it's all unopened, unexpired, never in the hands of a person in the public, and non-controlled medications. The way that we practically handle it is we basically provide all the logistics. Medicines are kind of packaged and by folks on the donating side who are staff. So oftentimes it's a nurse, a registered nurse or a vocational nurse, someone on that side. And then they are shipped directly from that health facility directly to the clinic. So we don't have a warehouse somewhere that's kind of sorting through and repackaging meds and sending them along. That's one of the reasons we're able to keep our kind of overhead very low and keep very lean, because we don't actually handle the medications directly. So they go directly from whoever has the medicine, so maybe a small nursing home, directly to the community clinic. And there it is kind of opened and received by pharmacists. So we basically provide all the logistics, help out with a lot of the record keeping, and our website is obviously able to track, thousands of donations. And so that's where technology really helps us, so that, I'm not on the phone calling FedEx saying, okay, pick up from this facility and okay, ship from that facility, because that's obviously unmanageable. This is where technology really can help us do this in a really organized fashion and an efficient fashion.
Hi. I was wondering where your company falls in the timeline of medicine expiration dates or use by dates, if that is a thing for medicine, and then maybe instead you guys more target medicine that's ended up in a dead end in the system where it turns into excess, but it's still totally in the useful stage?
Yeah, absolutely. So all of the medication under these state laws all has to be unexpired, and some states even stipulate expiration date that has to be 6 months or even further out. So we kind of work within the state to make sure that the medicine being donated is only that eligible to be donated, and that the clinic that on the other side of that transaction can use that medication in time. So the nice thing, though, is that because we shortened a medicine donation from a 9-month process down to a 2-day process, we can get medicine that was much closer to that deadline and make sure it gets to a clinic and used within a couple of days. And so we don't have much of the kind of surplus expiring in transit like it used to.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, is it like not possible for y'all to get medicine directly from the incineration place? Yeah, is there like a legal barrier or something between that, or yeah?
It's actually a pretty appropriate question. It's a strategy we're kind of thinking about right now. There's these programs called reverse distributors that are actually doing pickups from hospitals, and they're sending them. And as I mentioned earlier, there's only maybe 10 to 15 medical incinerators in the country. So oftentimes they have to send waste in California on a railroad across the country to Maryland in order to get it burnt. And it's not the most efficient process in the world. So that infrastructure already does exist, and in some states, those entities are eligible to donate. So it's definitely something that we're thinking about. It's like, do we even need to go out to these facilities one-to-one? You know, can we talk to someone who's already doing that work and leverage rather than reinventing the wheel?
I'm on the board of the local free clinic here in Grinnell, and so I want to know when we can get Sirum to Iowa. How quickly can we make that happen? What does that look like? And, you know, just like for those of us who are really interested and passionate about this, what's some of the groundwork that we can lay, knowing that this might not happen tomorrow? What can we do working with our legislators, things like that, to lay the groundwork for Sirum to be here in the future?
I would definitely say that's probably a longer conversation than we have during the context of this Q&A, Sonia, unless we have like 30 so minutes or so to have that dialogue. I would say that maybe the best thing is for probably us to chat offline and talk about it. Definitely come up and talk to me or Adam, because that's a probably longer conversation. We can get real in the weeds.